Welcome to this explainer on surviving the crying peak. Look, if you're sleep deprived right now, feeling totally overwhelmed, just take a deep breath. We're going to demystify infant crying today by combining real medical expertise with practical advice to give you a much-needed lifeline. We've got you, and we're going to get through this together. So if you're currently listening to your baby wailing and feeling completely helpless, I know this is exactly the question echoing in your mind. Why won't my baby just stop crying? Honestly, it can feel like you're failing or like you're doing something terribly wrong. But as we're going to see today, that is almost certainly not the case. Okay, let's dive right in. I want to start with literally the most reassuring statistic possible: 95%. In 95% of cases where a baby is crying excessively, there is absolutely no underlying physical illness. Less than 5% of the time is there a medical reason, something like an ear infection or a milk allergy. So the vast majority of the time, your baby is completely 100% physically healthy.
Section 1. Why do babies cry? The normal baseline.
Let's set the foundation here and just understand the basics of infant communication. From the exact moment they're born, crying is just totally normal behavior. It literally acts as their only tool to tell you what they need. They're crying to say, hey, I'm hungry, or I've got a dirty diaper, or maybe they just need some attention. Sometimes it's pain, or they're just plain stressed out and exhausted. And usually when you feed them, change them, or hold them, the crying just stops. Moving on to Section 2, the purple crying phase, a developmental hurdle. But what happens when you've met all their needs and the crying still won't stop? Well, what's really fascinating here is the global timeline. All across the globe, healthy babies follow a super predictable pattern. The crying starts to ramp up around 2 to 3 weeks of age. Then it reaches this really intense peak around 6 to 8 weeks, where a baby might cry for 2, even 2.5 hours a day. But then, thankfully, it tapers off between 3 and 5 months. So you are absolutely not imagining it. This is a measurable curve that almost all infants go through. The Cleveland Clinic emphasizes that this peak is a completely normal developmental stage. They call it purple crying. It is not a disease. I know a lot of people refer to it as colic, but medical experts actually prefer the period of purple crying. Why? Because that word period reminds us that it is temporary. It has a beginning, and thank goodness it has an end. The PURPLE acronym actually hits the nail on the head for exactly what you're facing. P is for peak of crying, so it increases weekly and peaks right there in the second month. U is for unexpected, meaning the crying just starts and stops for literally no apparent reason. R means resist soothing. No comforting techniques seem to work at all. Then there's another P, for pain-like face. They look like they're in absolute agony, even when they aren't. L is for long-lasting, because this can go on for hours. And finally, E is for evening. That's when the most intense crying happens, right in the late afternoon and evening, which you might know as the witching hour. Section 3. Spotting intestinal cramps, the Darmkramtjes factor. So alongside this normal developmental phase, your baby might actually be battling a physical hurdle too. Dutch medical sources refer to this as darmkrampjes, which basically translates to intestinal cramps. Because a newborn's digestive system is just so incredibly immature, processing milk or accidentally swallowing air can cause these really intense muscle contractions in the gut wall. It's a completely normal part of their whole system just waking up and learning how to work. You can actually spot these cramps pretty easily if you know what physical cues to look for. Like, is your crying baby clenching their fists? Are they kicking or aggressively pulling their little legs right up to their belly? Do you feel high tension in their body or see them arching their back? Also, passing gas or pooping while crying is a major giveaway. If you see these things on top of the crying, their tiny gut is just working overtime. All right, Section 4, when to call a doctor, spotting the red flags. Now, while we know that 95% of crying is completely normal, as a parent, you really need to know how to identify that 5% that actually requires medical intervention. It is absolutely crucial to contrast the signs of a normal crying phase, things like evening fussiness and healthy eating, with actual medical alarm signals. So the key here is knowing exactly when to seek help. The Jeugdgezondheidszorg in Utrecht advises calling a doctor immediately if you spot these red flags. First, a fever over 38 degrees Celsius in a baby under 3 months old, or a fever lasting 5 days in an older baby. Second, if your baby goes half a day with absolutely no wet diaper, that's a huge dehydration risk. Extreme lethargy, looking gray in the face, or making moaning sounds, those are also major warning signs.
And finally, if you see red spots that don't fade when you press a clear glass against them, that requires an immediate call to the doctor. But hey, if you don't see these flags, you're more than likely just dealing with that developmental crying phase.
That brings us to section 5, soothing your crying baby. Actionable survival tips. Okay, so if you've ruled out the red flags, your only job right now is to soothe your baby and just survive this temporary phase. Overstimulation is a massive trigger for crying. So try to systematically reduce stimuli. Just turn off the radio and the TV. Limit the number of activities and visitors you host in a single day, and really try to enforce sleep in a quiet, dedicated bed, rather than letting them sleep on your lap or in a noisy living room playpen. Now, for those painful intestinal cramps we talked about earlier, some rapid-fire soothing techniques can work absolute wonders. Try placing a warm cherry pit pillow right on their tummy to relax those muscles. You can also massage the belly with gentle circular motions, or do those little bicycle movements with their legs in the air to help release trapped gas. Also, wearing them in a baby carrier is incredibly effective. Your body heat, your motion, and the sound of your heartbeat just naturally calm them down. And definitely don't underestimate the power of sucking. Offering a pacifier or even just a clean pinky finger can immediately soothe a totally frazzled little nervous system. Now, you really want to pay close attention to this next one because it's a major hidden trigger. To prevent overexhaustion, you have to strictly monitor their wake windows. Get this. A newborn between 0 and 2 weeks old can literally only handle about 30 to 45 minutes of being awake before they need to be put back down to sleep. If you keep them awake longer than that, their stress hormones spike and the crying becomes much, much worse. Section 6. Protecting your mental health. You matter too. We really need to address the most important tool you have for soothing your baby, and that is your own mental well-being. Look, if you're highly anxious, feeling depressed, or just entirely depleted, your baby will actually sense that tension. It's like a giant feedback loop. This can trap you both in a terrible cycle where your stress makes their crying worse, which in turn, of course, just increases your own stress. The Cleveland Clinic powerfully reminds us of something so important here. They say, when your baby continues to cry, even after you've tried everything, the best thing you can do is step away for a few minutes. Just let that sink in for a second. It is absolutely necessary sometimes to put your baby in a safe place, close the door, and just walk away to breathe. Walking away isn't abandoning your child, okay? It's a vital safety measure. Stepping away prevents that intense, blinding frustration that can ultimately lead to shaken baby syndrome. Never, ever shake a baby. Placing your crying baby in a safe crib, closing the door, and just taking 5 minutes to reset your own nervous system, that is literally one of the best, safest parenting decisions you can make in that moment. So take a deep breath. Think back to that timeline we explored today. And please remember this, your baby is okay. You are doing a phenomenal job, and this exhausting phase will absolutely come to an end. Every single evening you survive brings you one day closer to the smiles and the calm that follow this peak. But once the crying does stop, their little brain begins to wire in entirely new ways. So as you survive this hurdle, it kind of begs the question, what massive developmental leaps is your baby's brain preparing for next? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Hang in there, you've got this.